All right, so I wanted to show you now a couple of things, um, but we're going to start dealing with the bane of all designers sending things to press, this banding. When you get the proof back and you've got the dreaded banding. How many people have seen that before? You get something back and there's like ridges in it, and it's horrible. And they say just add noise. Well, I will. I'm going to show you a technique that will eliminate all of your issues with banding forever. But we're going to get there doing something kind of fun. So these are pictures of a vacation I took in Greece, and it's a panorama. I'm standing on the dock and just taking a bunch of pictures. And Photoshop has the ability to stitch these pictures together. So you can use File, Automate, Photo Merge. So whenever you have multiple pictures and you want to put them together in one way or another, you use Photo Merge. And we'll add the open files. And now I've got 3 files here. We're going to blend the images together using Auto, which 9 times out of 10 that works just fine. So now Photoshop takes and makes a composite document and stitches it together. Okay. And now we have sort of the same sort of situation before where we need to crop out the empty parts, we can play around with content-aware fill maybe. So I don't want to lose too much sky. So let's use our content-aware fill trick. Oh, we gotta merge these into one. So let's merge the visible, and we saw this in the beginning, so I'm gonna expand by 1 pixel. And what the hell? How about these boats in the foreground? Let's try it. We'll add that in there. Expand by 1 pixel. And let's do our fill, content aware. Okay, now as expected, does a really good, and this guy is not, it's not even right to left, so this has done a very good job of seamlessly adding that sky. Let's check the foreground. Well, a little less than perfect, but it gives me a starting point. I can probably fix that. But now I have kind of a cool panorama. This looks fine and looks fine on screen, but when it prints, there's an issue. So and if you're going to see banding, where would you see it? You'd see it in the sky, right? Kind of hard to see on the projector screen. Let's look at individual channel. Okay, so the red channel. There's actually a lot of JPEG artifacts in this image that are not visible until you look at the individual channel. And this is easy to spot. Some banding issues are not easy to spot by eye. So you really have to make sure that you can identify whether or not the image is going to band when it prints. And it's hard to do that. It's always been a problem, and there's a real old school method of identifying potential bands. And I'm going to show that to you right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a curve on top, just in the plain old RGB curve. So I place a bunch of points. So just by clicking on the curve, a whole bunch of points on it like this. And then I'm going to be pulling into like this radical sine wave. Now the object is to get all the transitions in the image to be happening along maximum contrast. So there's very few places in the image where the transitions aren't almost vertical. Anybody seen curves like this before? But look at you can see, yeah, there's definitely, what I would hope is if the sky is really uniform, we'd get a much smoother transition in there. And this is, this is nasty, and there's some areas where I just know that this is gonna show up in print, this transition. We're gonna see some nastiness when this goes to print. Now down in here, it's too much texture. You'll never see anything like this. But this type of curve, commonly referred to as a solar curve, this actually was invented on the Quantel paint box, because they do images and then make an 8x10 transparency and then send that to get scanned and turned into CMYK. So it was really expensive. It used to cost, like $800 to get an 8x10 transparency, and then more money to get it scanned. And by the time they found out something was banding in print, they'd already spent thousands of dollars, and it just was a real nightmare. So the companies that were doing the retouching turned to the engineers, the Quantel engineers, and said, we need a solution for this. And the chief color engineer at the time was a man named Ed Manning. And he came up with this technique. He said, let's throw this curve on there and just see. And so back in the day, we used to call this Ed's curves, because he was the guy that invented it. But gradually over time, it's just been now called solar curves, because it creates a solarized sort of look. And this is only for visualizing. We're going to throw this away after we've, yeah.
Why does banding happen?
Why? Well, in this case, the banding is from JPEG artifacts that are in the file. You just can't, they're subtle, so you can't see it. But when it goes to CMYK, it goes through conversion, and blue pixels now have to be represented by magenta and cyan, and there are problems that occur at that point. But very often there's banding that's already there gets emphasized when you convert from RGB to CMYK. If it's already there, it will look worse once it prints. And when we're looking at this on the monitor, usually these skies are bright and they're blue, and it's hard to see. There may be a little bit of noise in it. We're not really certain. When you put this curve on it, it really highlights any potential band. It may not band, but it's better to make sure it never bands before you have to spend the money on the SEPs, Yeah.
A lot of times we see banding like in Illustrator files, it's a very slight gradation.
Yeah, if you put a digital gradation in there, even if you use Photoshop to make a gradation, sometimes that can band. Yeah. I wish that helped. Usually, if you're going to have banding, working in 16 bits by itself doesn't guarantee anything except that the bands will be in slightly different places. Because when it converts to CMYK, that's usually where the problem gets introduced. And the solution has always been to add noise. If you have just a little bit of noise, if you've got a good gradient and it's not really banded to begin with, if you add a little bit of noise, you can pretty much guarantee that it's not going to band. It doesn't take that much. But sometimes you have banding now, often, with digital cameras because of noise reduction and other image processing things that we didn't have when we were scanning film, which had a chaotic grain structure to begin with. Now the digital files are so clean, and they also have weird image processing things that get emphasized when you do these conversions. So we have to have a strategy for dealing with the banding that may be already in the file. This is the first step is being able to identify it. So this helps to identify it. The next step is, now what do you do? So we're going to hold on to this. But right now I'm going to just select out the sky. So I'm using the magic wand here just to kind of, it doesn't have to be totally perfect, but should go up to the edge of things. Okay, and then I'm going to jump this into a oops, sorry. I need to be in the background. I'm going to jump it out to a new layer. Okay, so here's just the sky. And I'm going to lock the transparency. And let's check the sky. There's the banding, right? So we can see the banding there. Now, I'm going to run a filter on this. And this is kind of not necessarily intuitive, but there's one filter here in this filter gallery. This is some of the older so-called creative filters that Photoshop had, and they stuffed them all into this filter gallery now and giving you nice big previews. The filter I'm going to use is this one called spatter. Now spatter is kind of a special case noise filter that breaks up the image. And the key to using spatter is to use the spray radius very high. So you put 25 as the highest it goes, and smoothness low, no smoothness. We want it at 1. And we're going to run that. You can't really see what it does, but see, this is now what happens to that blue after it's been spattered. It's diffused it, but it's really kind of smooth. Oops. The look of the blue is, you don't really notice it so much, except here around where these buildings were. It's picking up some of the color of the buildings. But it's actually transparency, because I've locked the transparency so it can't, and there's nothing in this layer to pull in here. So when we apply that on top of the blue, you know, we get a much smoother effect in the sky, and there will be no banding. Usually what I have to do sometimes, in this case with these really light things, I would mask off the spattered image where there's kind of, you know, lighter specks are going to show up. The other thing we can do is change the apply from normal to darken. And now the lighter specks won't show up. You get the best banding reduction if you leave it at normal and then mask off any little speckles. Okay. So that's better. Now I'm going to compare this to the other method, which is adding noise. So here's our banded sky. The correct way to add noise now is we're going to make an overlay layer. Is anyone familiar with that? Adding noise to the image using an overlay layer? Okay, very important that you do this. And don't add noise directly to the image. So I'm going to hold down the Option or Alt key and click on Add New Layer. The new layer icon down here at the bottom of the Layers panel, and I get New Layer Options. So now I want to change the mode from normal to overlay, select Fill with Overlay Neutral Color, and this is going to be my noise layer. Okay, and no effect yet. Now I'm going to add noise to this layer. Filter, noise, add noise. And obviously 30% is too much. And I've made this overlay layer. So I'm adding the noise to the overlay layer, not to the image. And now looking at it with the high intensity of this solar curve, you can see like here I've got 2.45% noise, and that's enough. You're not going to see banding, even though there's a band in here. This isn't as smooth as the diffuse, but that's enough to kill the band. So we take this off, and now we can look, and you can see the amount of noise in the image. Now compare this to the diffusion, the spatter. You don't see as much noise. It's not as apparent. But it took at least this much to kill the bands. This is using the traditional method of band killing. But the new method using spatter is smoother and more effective. So it's much nicer gradient here than the noise gradient was. Right?
Why did you use the overlay? Why not just directly on the...
Okay. Overlay, the thing about overlay is when you get into an area that's light, the noise sort of ramps off, because overlay has a stronger effect on midtones than it does on shadows or highlights. So the noise is more invisible, and it's more effective in the areas that need it. You know, you don't want noise in your highlights, and you don't want white noise in your shadows. So the shadow's pretty much free of noise. If I applied it to the image, it would look sort of like this. So the noise is sort of uniform everywhere. It's in the shadows and the highlights. When we do it as overlay, it's still kind of just there, but you see it mostly in the kind of midtones. You don't see it in the shadows or the highlights as much. So it's much more natural looking. It looks more like film grain. And in fact, if you want to simulate film grain, this is where you have to do it. Use this overlay layer and then blur the noise a little bit, and it will look a lot like film grain. But for all of that, the spatter just looks nicer. And now I'm zoomed way in here, 300%. It's more uniform in color too. Yeah.
On the spatter effect, I know when you zoomed in close, you got like the little white speck was down around the building.
Yeah.
Since that's in a channel?
It's in a separate layer, so I can kind of.
I mean, what if you added like a Gaussian blur to it, where it spread it out? Would that get rid of some of the white dots?
No.
No? Because I mean, sky. You're not gonna
No, as soon as you add the Gaussian blur actually introduces banding.
Does it? Yeah.
Yeah. Let me show you another image. Perfect segue to this. But so this was a job that, and I'm only showing you the. God, it's because it's a TIFF that the camera raw can open. Okay. So I got this file, and it was 16 bits. It was gorgeous. It was this huge file, and it had this big expanse of sky, and wanted to print it, and we made a test print, and it banded. So I'm actually gonna drag the this curve, my solar curve. I'm going to drag it from one document to the next. So I'm going to drag it to this, and so I got the print back, and I was seeing like this band and this band and these bands, and it was very subtle, but it was there, and it was weird because it was so even. I could not figure out what was producing this. Well, the thing that produced it is that he Gaussian blurred the sky. You don't see even bands like this unless somebody's done Gaussian blur. So, and this was a 16-bit file. He did everything correct, and he Gaussian blurred the sky, and that's probably where he introduced the banding. And it was in the RGB files. There was like nothing you could do. So we had to do the spatter thing, and I think actually the filter didn't at that time. I'm not sure if it runs in 16 bits now or not, but it didn't. That spatter filter is a very old filter. It's been around for a while, but it didn't run in 16 bits. So we actually converted his lovely 16-bit file down to 8 bits, ran the spatter on the sky, and the print came out just flawless. And I couldn't tell him that he should have just been at 8 bits from the get-go. So this illustrates two different things. First, just working in 16 bits is not going to rescue you. If you do something bad, it's going to bite you in the butt anyway. And second, it's often better to be in 8 bits and be able to see and predict how it's going to look, kill it then, because if you've killed the banding, if you've done just let's see. Well, just forget about the rest of the stuff. I'm going to I normally would want to isolate the sky because you don't like spatter to go over everything. But if I do the spatter on this image, and I don't even have to do as big a spray radius, just a little bit, say 15. And you see how now all of a sudden, this is so smooth when it prints. You can't see noise, you can't see bands, you can't see anything. So sometimes it's just better to be able to see it and identify it and kill it. When you're in 16 bits on the monitor, you're not really sure what you're looking at because the monitor is 8 bits. So you really can't see what a 16-bit file looks like. You just have to hope that you're okay because the banding could just be on the display. But if you're in 8 bits, the monitor can show you all the levels in the file. It can show it to you. And if you kill it in 8 bits, it won't ever print. So, spatter. Remember that.